Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to this session on inclusive mobility, making study abroad programs more inclusive for students with disabilities. We are Dominique Montagnese and Valerie Hees from SIHO. I'm myself working on the topic of inclusive mobility, and Valerie is the coordinator of the organization called SIHO that she will present now to you.
Good afternoon and welcome at the session also from my part. I will give a brief introduction to SIHO. SIHO stands for the Support Center for Inclusive Higher Education, and we are situated in Flanders in Belgium. SIHO is embedded by decree in higher education legislation, and we are specifically a cooperation between the university associations and the Flemish government. And our core task is to focus and support higher education in implementing inclusion measures to enhance their policies on inclusion in higher education, with a specific focus also on students with disabilities. We have a policy plan to support our higher education institution, and the main theme is that we are focusing on realizing inclusive higher education in close cooperation. We do that in close cooperation not only with the universities and the government, but also with students with disabilities. In April, we received a new covenant for 5 years. And one of the main focuses that also will be in this new covenant is that we will focus also on enhancing mobility for students with disabilities, but also for social inclusion at large. And in that new covenant, we will also closely cooperate with different stakeholders, as others, not only with disability officers, but for example, also with international officers. With SIHO, we are also coordinating the EPFIME project, enhancing a thought-out policy and framework on inclusive mobility across Europe. And we are coordinating that project with a lot of partners, with foremost our Flemish government, who is coordinating the project because it's a project in the policy reform of the Bologna process, but also with Erasmus Student Network. And we also have the perspective of university associations, with the Irish University Association as being partner, and also the head partner in Ireland, the Association for Higher Education Access and Disability, is also a partner in this project. But our colleague Dominique, who is focusing closely on the topic of inclusive mobility, will bring to you now also more information about the project.
Thank you very much, Valerie. So in this project, we did a lot of things that we will explain at the end of the presentation, but we wanted to focus for this presentation, especially on the research part. And we have conducted a research, especially through online surveys, not only, but also through online surveys. And we have been running 3 different online surveys. So one for students with disabilities, one for universities, and one for ministry. Today in this presentation, we'll be focused mostly on the students' answers and the university answers, but so that you know there's also a ministry results, and everything will be published later this year. But today we will focus on students and universities and the first glimpse into the results that we have found. So I will start with presenting the student survey results to you. It is important to know that we have received answers from students all over Europe, from 30 different countries, more than 30 different countries in Europe, and more than 1,100 students have answered, 1,134 students have answered, all of them identifying as a student with disability. So we have received quite a lot of answers from different countries, and from also different types of disabilities. So the second graph on the right side shows how varied the student population in this survey is. We have 29% of the students who answered who identify as students with dyslexia, 19% with students with chronic illness, and 15% with students with a physical disability or autism. But we have quite a wide range of disability represented in this sample. Out of all the students who answered this survey, 22% have declared having had mobility experience abroad for studies or traineeship. So 22% of them went abroad already. 41% haven't been abroad yet, but they said that they want to. They would like to go abroad for their studies or traineeship in the coming years. So that's a total of 63% that either have been abroad or plan to go abroad. So 63% of students with disabilities want to have a mobility experience, and that's one of the key findings already here in this survey. So 37% have declared not being interested or not having plans to go abroad in the future. We also asked, in terms of mobility experience, we also asked the length of the mobility abroad. How long did they stay abroad? So a large majority, 46%, stayed for a semester, between 3 and 6 months abroad. It is also interesting to see that quite an important amount, so 32% in total, stayed either less than 1 month abroad or between 1 and 3 months, so what we could consider short mobilities. So 16% less than 1 month, 16% between 1 and 3 months. That's a total of 32%. And the amount of students that stay for a longer period abroad, more than 6 months, is a little bit less. So 18% stayed between 6 and 12 months abroad. When we ask about the type of disability that they had for the student that went abroad, so the 22% that went abroad, we see that the most represented disabilities in mobility program in our case was 39% of students declared having dyslexia, 40% having chronic illness, and 25% having a physical disability. After that comes autism and visual impairment, and only at the bottom, 14% declared having mental illness or hearing impairment. So it is quite interesting also to note here how some disabilities that are a bit less represented in mobilities are, in this case, autism, visual impairment, mental illness, hearing impairment. We asked in our survey about disclosure. We know that disclosure is a very important topic, a very important part of the experience in higher education for students. Deciding to disclose or not your disabilities is an important process. So we asked them if they did disclose the disability at their home university. 71% of them said yes, and 29% said no. When we asked to those who said no, why they didn't disclose the disability, we have received the following answers. 39% of them were not asked by the institution, which is a very interesting number again, because it's simply because the university or the institution didn't ask about it. The second reason that comes is 33%, didn't think it was important. Students didn't think it was important to disclose a disability. And only third comes with 25%, the reason I didn't want to be labeled, which is also, again, interesting, as we might tend to think that this would have been a higher answer. Then comes over reasons, and one of them was, I think it's a violation of my privacy, and this is only 5% of the students. So one of the key findings that we have for this survey is that we also check the disclosure aspects per type of disability, and we see that disclosing disability is less common for students, for example, with a psychiatric disorder, where only 51% of them declared it or disclosed it. Students with ADHD, with 60% of them only declaring it and disclosing it, and mental health and chronic illness, which is 66% of them. Especially if we compare it to students with physical disability or visual impairment, which disclose it much more commonly, with 82%, 83%. So it seems like there is a pattern that invisible disabilities are a bit less disclosed, and it's probably more complicated to disclose. Among those students who decided to disclose their disability, 62% disclosed the situation, both at the home and the host institution. And 32% of them disclosed it only to the home institutions. while 6% did it to the host institutions. So here the important result that we believe is a bit, more interesting here, is that 32% disclosed it only to the home institution, and when they went abroad, they didn't disclose it to their host institution, which in the end doesn't inform the university where you are going on abroad, and makes it more complicated, of course, to apply or to receive reasonable adjustment, support, etc., etc. We asked another aspects of the mobility experience, and we asked about information provision. Here, I don't have graphs. I will just give you a little bit of key findings. One of the key findings that we found in the survey is that the information provision for study abroad for students with disabilities is lacking. Too many students still don't know that extra support or supplementary grants are available for them. And a large portion of students with disabilities don't think that Erasmus Plus, or in general going abroad, is something that they can also do. And that is unfortunately still something that is lacking nowadays. One of the testimonies we have extracted from the survey is a student who said, "I have not heard of any information about Erasmus for disabled students." So the message is unfortunately not passing fully yet. On information provision, we have asked as well the students if how they receive information about study abroad and mobility abroad. The largest majority, 99%, said that usually it's information days on campus, mobility fairs, a session about going abroad, and that's how most of the time universities communicate about those opportunities. Brochure as well are very well used. However, when we looked specifically at inclusive types of information provision or accessible types of information provision, we see that there is much less, this is less provided. Universities provide it much less usually. So for example, only 5% of the students declared that they had access to videos about mobility or study abroad in sign language, or 5% said that they had access to brochure in Braille, or 9% access to videos with subtitles, for example, which is, again, very low results, and says probably also a lot about how we can improve the situation and make the message come across a bit better. We have investigated the barriers to mobility, the barriers that students felt, and we asked if students have experienced any barrier to mobility when they went abroad, and 41% of them have declared having faced a barrier. 49% of them have said that they haven't faced a barrier, and 10% said that they were not sure really. And the barrier faced by students who went abroad was mostly the lack of information about the accessibility of the university where they wanted to go. They didn't know in advance, they couldn't find information if the university would be accessible for them. 50% found that support services from the host institution during the preparation was a bit lacking. 40% felt lack of information about the accessibility of the host city as well, not only the university, but also the city. They didn't know if the city where they wanted to go, if it would be accessible or not, and they really couldn't find this information in advance. And still 31% of barriers expressed were of financial nature. So one of the key findings we have also about this part is that although overall the satisfaction is quite positive regarding the covering of grants, for example, of expenses via grants, mobile students with disabilities indicates that challenges about the eligibility criteria and the application process are still there. They mention especially an application process that is often inaccessible for them. One testimony that we have extracted for you here as well about the barriers is the following. One student said, when I was preparing for my own year abroad to study, I was told I need to speak with my lecturers and the faculties, who unfortunately don't know a lot of information about disabilities in those countries. As a result of the lack of information, I have decided simply not to go abroad for the fear that I wouldn't be taken care of adequately. I have a couple more key findings for you from the student survey before we go to the university survey. So we have as a key finding that one of the key criteria for students to decide to go abroad and to choose a host university is the accessibility criteria. The learning, how accessible is going to be the learning, the campus, but not only, also what makes the student life around studying, the city accessibility, the transport accessibility, the housing. And all this information at the moment are not easily found. And this is a very important barrier for many students. What we have found on a more positive note is that what we call pre-visit, so before going abroad, having the chance to go a little bit before your mobility to visit the university, visit the campus. This is a practice that is in general very positive and has a very positive impact, an important impact on reassuring the students and the staff in charge of the mobility as well, reducing the doubts, reducing the fears, and making everyone a bit more confident about this mobility, upcoming mobility abroad. Last key finding from the student survey for today, we have found that international mobility exchanges for students with disabilities have very comparable advantages towards the students in terms of academic achievements, which are usually higher. When you go abroad, you have higher academic achievements, you increase your language skills, your personal confidence, you develop personal development, you do some personal development. So this is very comparable to the rest of the student population for students with disabilities. In general, what is also very interesting is that students with disabilities have testified about a more normalized self-perception, making them feel more similar to their peers after having had this opportunity to go abroad. We can go now to the second survey, and Valerie will take over from here again.
Okay, thank you, Dominique. Indeed, we also investigated the experiences of higher education institutions across Europe regarding inclusive mobility. We created a long survey. It was a survey both for inclusion officer and international officers. So they had to cooperate to fill out the surveys. We had 114 universities that have answered the questionnaire, and you can see that 22 countries were represented, and we were also very happy to have one response also from the United Kingdom. As you can see, the Flemish community and Ireland were well represented also in this sample, but that's aligning also with that we both have a coordinating role in the project. We also asked a lot of questions on disability, but also on inclusion in mobility. Today I will focus only on policies and strategies on inclusive mobility, but in the research report that we will launch regarding this project, you will also find more information about disability in higher education across Europe. Interesting to see is that one of the questions was that we asked institutions if they had defined or mentioned something about mobility and inclusion in their institutional strategic plan or internationalization plan on internationalization. And then you can see that 1/3 of the higher education institutions, about 32%, have mentioned something about inclusion in mobility. That's not very much if you see that all of the institutions who participated in the surveys regarding disabilities had already a lot of strategies. So that's here also highlighting that institutions are not so far yet to also implement inclusion strategies for students with disabilities in their mobility plans. Also, when asking, do you have some specific targets for students with disabilities in internationalization, we also see that only 10% of the higher education institutions has some focus on setting out targets to really enhance the participation of students with disabilities. We also asked institutions to highlight their good practices, and here you see, for example, a good practice of one of the higher education institutions in Flanders, who is saying that their internationalization strategic plans ensures necessary structures so that all students, but interesting also staff, can gain international experiences. And they are engaged and are focused to remove all possible barriers, including financial barriers, but also offering support, and not only during the mobility period, but also before and also after the mobility period. So they are really focusing on ensuring that every partner in the institution can have a mobility experience. We also asked if they took initiatives to encourage mobility towards students with disabilities. As Dominique already mentioned, we asked students if they received information about studying abroad. We also asked the same questions to higher education institutions. And there we see that almost a little bit more than half of the respondents of higher education institutions are mentioning that they are taking initiatives to encourage mobility of students with disabilities. But that's foremost for outgoing mobility. So they are focused to bring a good message to their students and to encourage them to apply for studying abroad. But when we are looking at the picture of incoming mobility, are you taking as support, as institution, some initiatives to welcome also incoming students from abroad in your institution? Then we see a little other picture. Then only 26% of the higher education institutions indicate they are doing something to attract or welcome students with disabilities in their higher education institutions. So we see that the picture is more focused on outward mobility, but that strategies or initiatives regarding incoming mobility has to receive more attention in the future. One good example also from a Flemish university was that they really made also a detailed website about studying with a disability at their university. They have developed even materials also for example, a checklist that students can fill out before they are contacting the university to have a good overview or what is studying at our universities and what would be possible barriers that I could encounter when I go to Leuven in Belgium. But remarkable is that they also are really focusing on inviting students not only to take contact, to engage and to talk about the needs of the students, but they are really inviting the student to come before they apply to that university, so that they can really take time to see in the real context and make the support needs of that student. We also focused on are you monitoring what inclusive mobility means in your institution? How many students are participating, not only in incoming, but also in outward mobility? And then we also see that that's really a lack in university institutions. They are almost non-existent at institutional level. So that's really important also to know that there are several reasons also why universities are not collecting the data, because they are simply also saying, yeah, there are not a lot of students, so we don't feel the need to collect and monitor data on inclusion in mobility. So that's an important point also for attention for our recommendations, that it's really important to monitor also how students experience and how much the situation is evolving at their institution. An important key finding was also that we see that international officers and also disability officers are mentioning that they are really not aware of the challenges faced by international students with disabilities. They are mentioning that they only have seen one case, two cases in higher education when they are working on the topic of disabilities. So for them, it's really a field that they don't know. And also one of the topics was that they are saying we are also not knowing really what the other parties are doing in our universities on the topic of internationalization or on the topic of inclusion. So the lack of communication and cooperation between inclusion officers and international officers and also other support services is really an important barrier, because students acknowledge that there's no communication, and they are mentioning in the testimonials that are sometimes also the reasons why they decide to not go abroad. So an important recommendation is also that we should focus on strengthen the cooperation and communication at institutional level. An important key finding was also that pre-visits at a host institution before the mobility takes place is really important, and not only for students with disabilities, but also international officers were saying that for them it's also really important to know the place where the students is going, to have more information about the context, because it also reassures them that the students is in safe conditions. And what we also have seen is that going to a university really gives the opportunity to set out the clear support services for students, which leads to a good experience abroad. So it's a really important topic, not only to focus for students, but also to strengthen the cooperation between the host and home universities in higher education. So that's a little bit the main key findings of the higher education institutions. As said, we have also analyzed the surveys of ministries. And we also have a lot of plans in the future, and Dominique will tell you more about what's coming next.
Indeed, many plans coming. So what's coming next? What you can expect from our project in the coming month? Well, first of all, we have mentioned it already a couple of times during this presentation. We have a policy report, a research report that is going to be published by the end of the year. We will release it towards November 2020, and you will find there all the information, all the data, analysis, and graphs that we have presented today. From the student perspective, from the institution perspective, but also from the ministry perspective, and a little bit more. So this you can expect by November 2020, and we will make sure to also send it to the colleagues from NADP, so they can also send it to all of you if you are interested. With the research report will come also policy recommendations. We are currently preparing a policy booklet with policy recommendations, very concrete recommendations for different stakeholders on what they can do to improve the situation. So there will be very concrete recommendations for university staff, for inclusion officers, for example, international officers, but also for ministries, for national agencies who deal with Erasmus mobilities, for example. There will be very concrete tips and also good practices to get a little bit knowledge with the topic and get a little bit better at organizing inclusive mobilities. A guideline is also in the pipeline. We will develop and publish a guideline towards the beginning of 2021, so more or less between February and March next year. This guideline will be very concretely for higher education institutions, and on how to implement a sustainable inclusive mobility strategy at the institutional level. We are developing a self-assessment tool that will help higher education institutions and national authorities, such as ministries, for example, to monitor policies on inclusive mobility around Europe and see a little bit, compare with your own position. So that will give you a general overview of what is out there, and you will be able as well to see where you fit in there and what you can do to go to the next step and be slightly more inclusive in organizing your mobilities. Last but not least, that's the online platform inclusivemobility.eu, which is going to be the platform for inclusive mobility in Europe, and where everything is going to be found about how to organize inclusive mobilities for students with disabilities. There will be concrete documents and resources for practitioners, national authorities, and that will be also released in February, March 2021. So everything is to be expected in the next 6 to 8 months, by March 2021, everything will be published. A little bit more about the platform. I think this is an important thing to also understand a bit better. So as I said, this will be inclusivemobility.eu, the platform for inclusive mobility. And we really identified three major stakeholders here that are going to be the target of the platform. We have, first and foremost, the students. So students with disabilities will be able to find all the information they need. So as we have seen in the research, there's a lack of information. There's a lack of information on what to expect from the university, how accessible it is, but also for what to expect from the city. So we are tackling all this. We are trying to be as transparent as possible to help students make an informed decision on where to go abroad and on deciding, yes, what is the best option for them out there. So students will be able to find, for example, national grants and support services in the different countries that are available for students with disabilities. If they go to another country, what is available for them? Can they apply to something? Is there some support service that the ministry is offering or that the university is offering for them? Or maybe is there something in their own country and that they already receive as a support? But can they go abroad with it? For example, if you have a personal assistant that is covered by the state through social welfare, for example, the question is often, can I go abroad and keep this support? So we are trying to analyze that by analyzing different policies at national level. Students will be able to find information on the university, the contact of the disability or inclusion officer as well to ask more questions. And there will be in general very accessible information provided in an inclusive way, testimonies from students who have been abroad in the past, some inspirational messages that this is possible. Universities will find all the information that I mentioned before, plus some others. They will be also able to see a little bit what other universities do and what their partner universities do in terms of accessibility and inclusion, with the aim of trying to instigate a little bit more this approach of checking what my partners can offer in terms of inclusion. This is something also that is a little bit lacking nowadays when universities make partnerships. So we also try to make this a little bit better. They will find clear and transparent information to support their students, the guidelines that I mentioned before, the self-assessment tool, and all the documents that we are developing through this project. Last but definitely not least, ministries for education around Europe will also find the different policies in different countries and see a little bit what all countries have as strategies for ensuring inclusive mobilities. So they will be able as well to monitor that a little bit, get some inspiration, and also maybe some contact and good practices from neighboring countries. So we invite you to continue to follow our project and deliverables. Everything can be found again on the platform, inclusivemobility.eu. If you want to follow us on social media, especially we are using a lot Twitter and LinkedIn, you can find with the hashtag inclusive mobility. SIHO has an English website, so siho.be. You can find English information about what SIHO does. And we have actually also a very nice newsletter in English, so don't hesitate to subscribe. And you can also follow SIHO on Twitter. We finished this presentation with a couple of triggering questions because there will be now also a bit of exchange, Q&A with the audience and the participants. So Valerie and myself will be here now to answer some of your questions, but we also wanted to ask you some questions to start thinking a little bit about it. So we have 4 questions for you. The first one is, what was a key finding for you in the presentation? Did you see something? Did you hear something that was unusual or something that made you think and you realize, oh, I didn't know that before? Second question is, can you relate to what we have said? How is it at your institution? What is the situation there? Is it something that you have already experienced? The third question is, what can you do at your institution to initiate a change? Or what is it that you can influence? And what can you do tomorrow already? Or what can you do next semester? What is the process that will take a bit more time maybe? And last question is, what do you need to achieve such a change? If you would like to implement a change now, who can help you in this process? Which are the department or colleagues that can help you as well? So yes, those are questions for you today, and we are looking forward to exchanging with you after this presentation. Thank you very much for following, and well, talk to you in a bit.
Thank you.
Thanks.